Hello, my name is John T. Bannon. Obviously, I may not need a microphone. I'm writing the first of two books based on my grandfather's war diaries in East Africa during World War I. He also was John T. Bannon. John T. Bannon, DCM, 4 Royal Irish Rifles, 1 4 King's African Rifles. Now, both he and I are from Uri. I was 9 when he died in 1961. I remember the lion skins and the African drums as a little boy he had in the shed, but unfortunately, they have all rotted away. Now, in my home city of Newry, well, they affect to call themselves a city, had an excellent book the museum produced a year ago about Newry's Roll of Honour. And my grandfather actually gets 3 pages in it. Obviously, he was one of the very few people from Ireland who actually was serving in Africa during the First World War. His DCM was actually an African DCM. And I've looked at the records of other DCM holders in Irish regiments, and I cannot see any others, so I'm sure there are. We have in the family several photographs of him. This is, you can't see, but you can see later, of my grandfather in his King's African Rifles uniform. This is him with officers of his 1-4 KAR. I'm not sure if it was in Bombo, or at Fort Johnston, or in Portuguese East Africa, or in German East Africa, or in Northern Rhodesia, or in Uganda, because he was in all those theatres between 1916 and 1918. So, while I'll race through what he was up to, I would also like, if time permits, to read a few of his observations as he passed through these areas. Anyway, he was a reservist with the County Down Royal Irish Rifles. He was sent to Dublin at the end of April 1916 during the Easter week rising. It so happens, a stone's throw from his grave, which I'll be visiting next week when I go over to Ireland to visit my grandfather's only child, his son, my father, who is 90. And thanks to my father, who's retained my grandfather's DCM and the 32-page diary, and this is a copy of the original, has been fertile grounds for me to research. Anyway, there's a Mr. Rankin buried just opposite my grandfather. He cycled 65 miles to Dublin to fight with the Irish rebels against the British, also against my grandfather's side, during the Easter week. I think my grandfather was sickened by what happened. He immediately tried to get to France. He was turned down as he was too valuable as a champion bomb thrower and sergeant major training troops in County Down and County Antrim. But, as you may be well aware, this was the time when the King's African Rifles needed to be massively increased. So he was the right person at the right time. They needed experienced NCOs, so therefore off he went at the end of May 1916 to arrive at Nairobi in early July 1916, and then across Lake Victoria to Bombo. And he was at the wedding of the Kabaka. He was a guest at it in October 1916. He writes about the lion skin and the 2 leopard skins and the drum that he was given by the Kabaka, whose son, by the way, the second Kabaka, the first Kabaka we're referring to as Dowdy Chua II. His son was actually kidnapped in a special operations by Britain and taken to Britain and put up in some style at the back of Buckingham Palace. He died in poverty then in Bermondsey. That's another story. Anyway, my grandfather was fed up drilling at Bombo. He does write about some of the activities he was doing. He writes, after a while at Bombo, I passed my language test, which was Kiswahili, as he called it, and was made regimental sergeant major. The depot had a fife and drum band, which could play a few tunes by ear, just like one of our Irish country bands. They did not, of course, understand any class of music, but I taught this band a few war airs, such as Tipperary, Keep the Home Fires Burning, and last but not least, St. Patrick's Day. These tunes the band played when passing my house in the evening after blowing retreat. In the evenings, I used to get this band together, and for quite a time, I hummed an air until boys could also hum the same. I knew these tunes. It was a simple matter for them to play them on their flutes. I also taught the big drummer to cross the drumsticks, etc., which was a very difficult job, etc., etc., etc. Right after that, he went into German East Africa. This was now early 1917. He was then moved down to Fort Johnston, the Bar, and then von Sturmer was raiding Portuguese East Africa, especially in Zambezi and Nyasa provinces, in early 1917. So the short coal column, or the Mwembe column, which Magranda was part of, was sent from Fort Johnston northeastwards into Portuguese East Africa, northwards to the Rovuma River to chase von Sturmer out. My grandfather's present describes the famous crossing at Sasawara, where tents were filled with straw to convey over 1,200 soldiers and carriers. After that, he was in the Tunduru, Baby, and Mantaka area, and this was the time when Tafel was retreating from the Mahenge Plateau. He was at the Battle of Nuramahiga. After that, he moved back across the Livingstones, back down to Blantyre in Nyasaland for 4 months. And then in July 1918, with von Lettow-Vorbeck in the south of Portuguese East Africa, his 1/4 KR was sent over to Malemal, to Molekwe, Aragonia area to try and cut them off. And there was a total chase for the next 2 months, culminating then at the Battle of Leoma on the 31st of August 1918. And I met with Zakaria Popper, who is the grandson, he's actually half Tanzanian, half German, the grandson of Captain Hans von Popper, who was with the Schutztruppe, and I believe that von Popper's field company was fighting against my grandfather at that time. Anyway, after that, my grandfather taken up Lake Nyasa again and over the Livingstone Mountains for the last 3 weeks of the World War. And this is a very exciting time when he joined up with the Northern Rhodesia Police B Company. And I have the diary of Captain Russell to complement my grandfather's diary, plus also been able to use Governor Schnee's diary and the reminiscences of General Lettow von Vorbeck. So therefore, there was a chase through southwestern Tanzania and Brunt, Tandala, to Mbuzi Mission on near Fife. The Battle of Fife is mentioned. Then the last 10 days of the war, chasing the Schutztruppe and von Lettow-Vorbeck, the 100 miles from Saizi River, Mbuzi Mission, to Kasama. And the last battle of the First World War was on the 12th of November at the Battle of the Malima Stream, 5 miles northeast of Kasama. My grandfather writes about he was in the middle of it. And then 2 days later, of course, you had the first unofficial surrender. My grandfather actually was at the final surrender at Abercorn, of course now called Mbala, on the 25th of November 1918. He writes about it. And I will be there next year. I want to visit all these places. And so I'll just read 1 or 2 quick little observations he made about life, because you won't find these in the rather dry, which I have tons of regimental records. But I like what he said about the spies. We don't hear much about what happened to the African spies. It wasn't nice, and my grandfather did not relate it, but he said, the following day, the Huns attacked our camp at about 11:30 a.m., but we were well dug in and welcomed their visit. We captured on this occasion a few Hun natives who gave us some valuable information. Next day, the Huns sent spies into our camp, selling eggs and fowl, but we found their game and treated them as spies. At this place, we had a party of Askaris who went out on patrol. After marching from 11 o'clock a.m. until 7 p.m., we camped for the night alongside a river and a native kraal. At this place, there was an old native woman, very old, and she lived in a kraal built on the top branches of a tree. This was the only person I had seen. She had no clothes on, and her skin was wrinkled and flabby. Her finger and toenails were inches long, and we could not understand anything she said. She just mewed like a cat when we spoke to her. I had a mule with me on this patrol, and I'll finish off with this. About midnight, the lions came round our camp, roaring. This is where in the Tunduru region, in the far south of Germany, East Africa, Tanganyika, now Tanzania. After about midnight, the lions came round our camp, roaring mad, and I think there were at least 7 or 8 of them. The other fellow with me said it was the mule they were after, and asked me to drive it out of our camp for our safety, but I would not do this. And so there's little observations like this that put real meat on this. Thank you.